Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. So, how's everybody doing? Everything good? Fantastic. This week's episode, I decided to go back to what happened to these cold cases series. And we're going to talk about a group of murders happened in Central Florida. They were most, you know how sometimes they give nicknames to either the serial killers or a set of murders, especially when they don't know the perpetrator. In this case, they were mostly referred to as the strip murders. And that was because they occurred, a lot of the victims frequented the Dale Mabry Strip in Tampa. But it was also known as the red light murders. And at one point, I think when police caught on that they might be dealing with one person, they started calling him the Gulf Killer. This because most of these crimes occurred over on Florida's west coast, right off the Gulf of America. So anyway, let's get right into it because some of them, how's this? Some of them were solved, not all of them. There's a little bit of what they call sometimes false confessions that you will get from certain serial killers where, yeah, they did some of them, but then they'll say, yeah, I did that and that and that. I guess more for the notoriety, especially if they know that they're they're going to be either in prison for life or they're going to be on death row. So there's a couple of them. We'll get to that towards the end where some of the victims really that's not really the perpetrator. And then of course we have the Jane and John Does. These are people that we don't know who killed them because we don't even know who they were to begin with. But let's get right down to it. And this first case, you're going to see it really that how's this? You're going to see it's kind of like a strange case in the sense that it wasn't the typical victim that you're going to see that the majority of them had, but it happened amongst them, and we still really can't discount it just because this one victim didn't fit the pattern of the rest of the other victims, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, now, like I was saying, the Gulf Killer, this was a nickname given to a possible serial killer who was active in the Pasco County and the wider Tampa Bay area of Florida. A group of unsolved murders of 14 women and 2 men were committed between 1971 to 1978. While the victims were grouped together differently at various points, 9 were attributed dubiously to a single killer. Whether the murders were connected to one or multiple individuals, feuding pimps, criminal organizations, or a sexually depraved killer was never determined. At least 8 of the victims were involved in sex work or prostitution. You know, they've changed it now to sex work, but it's prostitution on the Dale Mabry Strip. And back then, from what I understand, the Dale Mabry Strip, they had a lot of bars. Uh, if you wanted to go see one of these X-rated movies, you would go in there. They had like a lot, for lack of a better word, it wasn't just bars; it was raunchy stuff. So unfortunately, this had like a tenderloin kind of feel to it. Now, the first one that I was talking about, this is January 1975. And there's a young lady, and her name is Betsy Loden. She's 22 years old. And she's clad in a nightgown and bathrobe. And she's found in the garage of a house at 2321 East 5th Street in Tanglewood Terrace. This is like a suburb of Newport Richey. And she was bound hand and foot with medical or surgical tape, and a strip of the tape was placed over her mouth. She was lying face down next to her yellow Toyota Corona, and the car's ignition was on, but the car wasn't running. Later on, they found that there was something, some type of belt or something was loose on the car, which basically that's why it turned off, but it had been running. So when she's found, the police believe that she may have died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but it's difficult to believe that you're going to commit suicide when you're bound hand and foot and you've got a strip of tape over your mouth. But there were no traces of gas inside the garage, and her body showed no significant wounds or bruises. Okay. Now, the police, they don't find any, they only find a little bit of disarray in the furnishings inside the house, indicating some type of struggle, but nothing was missing. As far as, was this a robbery gone wrong? Who knows? But no. So Betsy had rented this house 2 months before, and her ex-husband Charles Loden, he's 27 years old. He's the one that finds her when he arrives at the house about midnight. He had gotten off of work, and there's no telephone inside the house. So he runs across the street, calls to the neighbor, and calls the police from their house. Now, these neighbors, later on, they tell the police that they had seen her around noontime, and she's walking a dog, and this is a dog she was keeping for a guy named John Moore. Now, John Moore, he's the manager of the Frankenmuth restaurant. He wasn't able to keep the dog, so she had said, I'll keep it. Now, will she be keeping that dog out of, because by the way, by the time she's got this dog, she's not working there anymore. Did she keep the dog out of goodwill, or was there a reason why she kept it? Was a German Shepherd, why she took the dog in? Was like, did she have fear of, her safety? Because she was living there alone. Her ex-husband was not living there. Now, she had, like I said, she had worked at this Frankenmuth restaurant as a hostess until about December 12th of 1974. And prior to this, she had worked at a place called Innisbrook as a waitress, and she was there from October 1973 to August 1974. She had moved in from out of town, by the way. Now, her mom, named Ruth Court, had just visited her during the Christmas holidays a few weeks before, had flown in to see her. Now, the police said, quote, we think she was taped in the kitchen and carried to the garage. Now, the police, they never really say exactly why they believe that, but it makes sense. Now, the police had a suspect, but they never gave out his identity. At the beginning, they said, we have a suspect, but they never give out any information. Like, who do you think it is? So it's unknown if her husband was ever a suspect, even though the police were very close-mouthed about any suspects. They never say, oh, we think her ex-husband, or we think the neighbor, or we think a guy that was seen. They never, nothing ever comes out as to who they think killed this poor girl. Now, she had divorced her husband, Charles Allen Loden, which, by the way, he passed away in 2002. They get married in 1973, right? And after this, she leaves Ohio. They get divorced. This was a very short marriage, which leads me to believe this wasn't like, they get married in 1973. She divorces him, and she leaves for Florida. She leaves Ohio for Florida. And it looks like he followed her down here to Florida, and she quits her job at this place in Innisbrook when he gets hired as a truck driver by them. So maybe for the purposes of, what would you say it? I don't know, the judicial system, but Or maybe he follows her down to Florida. She quits the job at this location when he gets hired. Makes you believe that she's trying to get away from him. So again, um, police never say anything as to whether they suspect him or not. Not one way or the other. 2 years go by. There's no leads, no arrests in the murder of Betsy Loden. All right. But it turns out this was not the only murder case that went cold. All right. From what I understand, they never say, well, we found fingerprints. Now think about this, though. If it was her ex husband and his fingerprints were there, well, apparently maybe he had come over before. Who knows? So, in other words, he could justify, why are my fingerprints there? Or why was he there? He could have said, oh, yeah, she told me to come over when I got off of work. Maybe that wasn't the truth, but she's dead. And one has to wonder, did they ask her mom? Her parents are up in Ohio. Just because her parents said no, you never get any more feedback on that. So her parents, all right, they take her back. They bury her in Ohio at Greenwood Cemetery. In other words, they take her back home. But as you're going to see, a lot of the victims um, that eventually ended up being killed, either number one, either they were unknown, they were Jane or John Doe's, or the family, some of them had been written off, for lack of a better word, or the family sometimes didn't even have the funds. But so a lot of them ended up in a place called Tucker Cemetery. And this cemetery is located in Dade City, Florida, and it's the oldest cemetery in Pasco County, and it existed prior to 1855. Originally, the land belonged to Thomas and Sarah Tucker. They settled in the area around 1842. And 3 years later, they planted the first orange grove. Remember, Florida, once upon a time, was citrus was the deal here. Now, the family history records for the Tucker family, who always lived in that vicinity, go back all the way back to 1790. And as a matter of fact, the community, when it's starting up, it's known as Tuckertown until the railroad arrives, and then it's known as Richland, which is good. Maybe they're trying to make it like Richland, we'll be rich. So at one time, this cemetery, it was part of the original homestead, and the old house, which is not there anymore, it was that was part of the land. So what they did was the entire front section of the cemetery was deeded to the county as a burying place for indigents in 1965. So what the Tucker family did expressly is, we're going to give this land as a cemetery, not a regular cemetery, but for people like that didn't have any place else to be buried. In 1970s, there's a Reverend Kenneth Tucker. He's a descendant of the Tucker family. And he tells the story of how his aunt shares with him many years before, that one time they're standing in the front yard of the old homestead and they see a rider's approaching on a horse, and he gets closer, he slumps over, and come to find out it's a young Indian boy who's fallen off. He falls off the horse and just dies. He'd been shot. He had a gunshot wound, and he was buried in that cemetery, which was originally their family cemetery. Because remember, this thing didn't go to become for the indigents till the 1960s. They bury him there on their family cemetery, and they kind of ironically they bury him not far from where a woman was buried who was killed by the Indians. Because remember, in Florida, in this part of Florida, there was something called the Seminole Wars. So now what they did was, when they deeded over that portion to the county, in exchange, the county agreed they were going to fence it and maintain it in perpetuity. But the original cemetery was reserved for the family, the Tucker family, and their descendants. So that's the deal they made. Now, up until 1979, because remember, we're here talking all these things happened around the 1970s, a local undertaker had buried about 17 infant children of indigent families in the cemetery. What that means is these were families that were so poor that they didn't maybe have the funds to bury their children. So it wasn't only victims of violent crimes, even the children of indigent families were buried there. Now, the front of the cemetery is outside the chain link fence placed around the original cemetery by the county. Um, and like I said, some of the ones that ended up there were the victims of what became known as the Gulf murders or the Dale Mabry Strip murders. Now, the first of these strange case and unsolved cases occurred surprisingly close to where Betsy Loden was killed. All right. Later on, you're going to see a map of where all these victims, and you're going to see really how close in reality they were. Um, and surprisingly, just like Betsy, this lady is taken from inside her house, or her, at the very least, her driveway. Again, the thing being here, this was not somebody with a risky lifestyle who was maybe at the wrong place at the wrong time or hanging out with the wrong people. This victim, her name is Bethany Wright Nielsen. She's 55 years old, and she's reported missing from her job at the county building on October 15th, 1971. Remember, 1971. This is 4 years before Betsy Loden gets killed. And Newport Richey police, they find there's a back window forced open at her home on Rio Drive, and there were bloodstains throughout the house, and bloodstains and a partial denture in the driveway. The next day, the next day, her burned body is found in a shallow grave in Columbia County, Florida, which is right at the Florida Georgia border. And this was about 15 miles north of Lake City. She's found by a fisherman on his way to the Swanee River. So the ground around this grave was scorched. Makes you think maybe they were trying to burn her body beyond recognition. And it also accounts as to why her features were burned beyond recognition. Now, she gets identified because of the dental comparison. Obviously, if those were her dentures out in the driveway, she, there was probably a dentist that they found to match it up. So anyway, they do make the ID through the dentures. Now, the police believe that she was killed in Newport Richey and then transported to where her body was burned. Her mother, Jessie Wright, had died the year before. Now, her parents were from Hammondsport, New York. This is where she'd grown up. And she had left after the death of one of her former husbands, of which she had about five or six. And guess what? Her murder is never solved. Now, they never explain, like, again, this was, and in some of this you wonder, is this police incompetence? Or is this like we're not letting out information, hoping that when we find the culprit, well, they'll know we're not knowing, certain information? No. I mean, you're thinking they forced open a window, they got into the house, they apparently maybe this lady was running from them, there's bloodstains all over the place, but it's never solved. So you're thinking, okay, and I understand back then there was no forensic evidence, which I don't know even now if they even kept anything from that murder scene as far as to test it now. Fast forward, what, 40 years? But again, just like Betsy Loden, she's never. And by the way, again, we come back. This lady, she's 55 years old. She works for the county. She had moved only a few years before. And somebody goes to the trouble that you could say, well, did they kill her? Were they trying to rob her? It went wrong. They kill her. No. There's nothing, no mention here of robbery. They chase her, looks like, all over the house. They drag her down, and they take the pain to drive all the way to dump her body in the middle of nowhere in this remote place on the Florida Georgia border. And she's just found by happenstance because a fisherman sees her. If that wasn't the case, she might have decayed and nobody would have found her. Who knows? Again, big giant question mark, just like the Loden murder. All right. So again, that's to say that it's cold. That's an understatement. Now, the next murder is this lady called Wilma Ida Mae Woods. She's 49 years old, and she's found December 29th, 1973, by a passerby on State Road 577 near Wesley Chapel. This is in south central Pasco County. They find her. She's lying down in a ditch with several inches of water. She's only wearing shoes, completely nude. Remember, this is a 49-year-old lady, face down in a ditch, wearing only shoes. Her body, though, is relatively unscarred. There's no indication of violence. But what they suspect is she was strangled or suffocated because they find there's blood in her throat. But her windpipe is not crushed. What, did they hold her face down into the ditch of water? Now, the way they identify her is she's got 3 tattoos on each thigh, including a rose and the name Wilma. So, but it really wasn't just that her name was on there because Wilma, let's face it, I'm sure there's lots of Wilmas. Tampa police were familiar with Wilma because she'd been arrested for public drunkenness only a few days before, on December 26th, 3 days before, or at least 2 days before. They arrested her December 26th. They released her on December 27th. That's the last time she's seen alive. They see her leaving a North Franklin Street bar in Tampa with a male companion about 10:30 p.m. Now, once the autopsy report is complete, it's confirmed she's asphyxiated, and officially it's a homicide case. Now, the police start looking around, see if we could find his companion, but they can't find him, and her case remains unsolved. Point being that a bunch, drunk people stumbling in and out of a bar, and if anybody of those bars, because a lot of these people were well known, in other words, they were regulars, nobody's gonna come and start talking about, oh yeah, I know who that guy is. Remember, whoever killed her is still running around. So even if anybody in any of these places saw her leave, knew who the guy was, they're like, no, I'm staying out of this. Again, unsolved. Now, her son Robert takes her body back to her hometown in Rome, Georgia, and she's buried over there in the Oakland Cemetery. What's really unusual is 2 other bodies are going to be found a few years later at the exact same location. And that's, I think, part of what gives rise to, as these crimes accumulate, that this might be the handiwork of one person. Or word had gotten around, hey, this is the place you go to dump bodies. Which makes you pause and think like, wow, like the word had gotten around that this is the place you get rid of your messes. Now, the next body turns up on July 10th, 1974. This is like about, 18 months after Wilma's found. They find the partially unclothed body of a guy named John Urbain Villandry. He's only 20 years old. He lives at 5870 56th Avenue North, apartment 183, St. Petersburg, Florida. And he gets found because a passing cyclist along State Road 581, which, by the way, this State Road 581 gets dubbed the road to nowhere. Number one, because it dead ends at a barbed wire fence. The name sticks because so many murder victims were dumped in this rural area of Pasco County. So that the road to nowhere, it had a double meaning to it. His body, just like Wilma's, it's found in a water-filled ditch. He's wearing a t-shirt and a pair of Levi jeans that had been pulled down around his ankles. They never publicized anything if he was raped or sodomized. But that's, Wilma's only wearing her shoes. This guy, 20-year-old, t-shirt with his jeans around his ankles. Okay, so, and by the way, for anybody thinking, well, was it maybe a lover? He had a girlfriend, but again, who knows? So that night he's using a 1970 red and black Fiat convertible that belonged to his girlfriend, Bonnie Bigelow. About a week later, the car is found at Gene's Lobster House in Madeira Beach. They verify his identity through a device designed to correct spaces between the teeth So they check with an orthodontist that leads to the doctor who had fitted the victim with his device. So they definitely know it's him. Now, 8 months before he gets arrested, I'm sorry, 8 months before he gets killed, Villandri, he's arrested and charged with possession of an estimated 10 to 15 pounds of marijuana. And police ultimately believe that his death was connected to the drug trade. Like all the others, his murder remains unsolved. Now, 6 months after John Villandri is found in the ditch is when Betty Loden is found dead in her garage. Now, the next murder victim, which is, and this for you, for those of you that are looking at the video version of this, you're going to see there's a map here that shows the spots where the different victims were eventually found during all these years. The next murder victim, her name is Diana Lynn Valek. She's only 18 years old. She's going to be the first one of what are considered the strip murders, which, by the way, they're not using that strip murders for a while. Her nude, badly decomposed body is found in Orlando Lakes Orange Grove near State Road 54. This is May of 1975. She's laying in a ditch. She's shot to death. She ends up being buried at Tucker Cemetery as a Jane Doe. Remember, they have no idea who she is. 2 years go by before they're able to identify. The police estimate she's killed around May 12, 1975, and she's been laying in this orange grove about 4 days before she's found. Remember, in Florida, May, it's hot. In the woods, insects, you name it, even animals, 4 days, a body can decompose very quickly. Now, the detectives aren't sure whether she was killed, where she was found, or she had been dumped there after being killed somewhere else. The medical examiner finds that she's been shot at least 4 times, but he finds 14 small caliber bullet wounds caused by the bullet ricocheting inside her body. So there was no way she was going to live from any of these wounds. Now, what happens is she's reported missing about a month after she was believed to have been killed by her mother, Mrs. Roy Sander, out of Clarksburg, West Virginia. That's where she's originally from. Remember, when they find her, they believe they don't make a connection between the missing report her mom's issued and this body that they found a month before. Finally, Diana Valek, she's identified because the police cross-referenced her case with the missing persons report, which had been issued by the Tampa Police Department, and they realized that the description matches the Jane Doe found in 1975. They take pictures of the jewelry on the body to her parents, and they're able to identify 3 pieces of the jewelry. They also, the detectives had a dentist who had her dental charts, and they were able to confirm her identity. Now, there's never any explanation why it took 2 years to obtain the dental records. She was ID'd after the case was reopened by the new sheriff, John Short. And I throw that in there because sometimes, believe it or not, leadership at the top does have a lot to do with how cases are handled, especially on somebody that maybe they thought, she works on the strip. It could have been anybody. But anyway, there you go. Now, Valek, she's a professional go-go dancer. She works at a place called the Carrollwood Bottle Club on North Dale Mabry. She frequents other clubs along the strip, including the Sportsman's Lounge. She's last seen hitchhiking at about 7 p.m. on May 15th, 1975, and then her body's found 4 days later. Again, hitchhiking, not a good thing either. Authorities, believe it or not, at that time, she's married to this guy named Frank Michael Valek III, who was a seaman from New Orleans. They can't find him. And he died in 2003. I found him. He passed away in 2003. I don't know if he was married then or married afterwards, but she must have married him very young. When she dies, she's 18 years old. So detectives, they say that due to her lifestyle, tracing her whereabouts during her final days was very difficult. and her family just decided to leave her buried at Tucker Cemetery. Now, it's noted that John Villandry and Wilma Woods, they'd been dumped in that same area, which at that time was lightly populated and had very sparsely traveled roads, which means if you went in there maybe 2, 3, 4 in the morning to dump a body, it's not like you're going to have a bunch of traffic passing by to see you doing that. On August 21st, 1976, this is the next person that turns up dead. Her name is Enid Marie Branch. Again, this is August 21st, 1976. She's 21 years old. Her nude body's found in the neighboring Hillsborough County. This is on the side of a deserted dirt road on the south side of Lake Rogers, north of Crawley Road. She'd been shot several times in the head. Her right leg was almost severed, and her face was mutilated. She left behind a 4-year-old son named Patrick, who was later adopted by by her mom and her stepdad. She had been studying refrigerator repair at a Tampa trade school. But according to law enforcement, she would work at night as a sex worker, as a prostitute. So, of all of the ones that, you think about, here's this young lady. And for those of you watching the video, I'm showing her graduation picture. You look at her. She's trying to, she has a little boy, which, if you think about it, she had this child maybe when she was 17 years old. She's trying to get herself together. She's studying to be, of all things, a refrigerator repair, which is great. But to supplement her income, she prostitutes herself at night. And also what I think is interesting or disturbing is they just don't shoot her. They mutilated her face. Again, you never know. Was this some type of serial killer weird stuff, or was for some reason they're thinking we don't want people to know who she is? And her right leg is almost severed. Do you think, well, at some point were they thinking we're going to dismember her? And they said, this is harder than we thought? Who knows? Now, her family had lost touch with her a few weeks before her death. She's last seen alive as she leaves a Tampa restaurant at 4 a.m. on the day she was killed. So there we go again. They the family knows but doesn't really know what's going on in a sense. So a year later, this is April 18th, 1977, our next victim, her name is Mary Jane Burke. She's from St. Petersburg. She's 19 years old. And she's found among discarded toys under a bush in a vacant lot at Iowa Avenue and Dale Mabry Highway. And she's found by a group of junior high school kids as they're walking to school. Medical examiner finds she's died of multiple head injuries. And there was also evidence she had sexual intercourse several hours before she died, but had not been raped. She was also strangled and might have choked on the blood she swallowed after her jaw was broken in 3 places by her killer. The blows were dealt by a bare hand. So whoever did this punched her. This wasn't somebody that grabbed a stick, a tool. Whoever inflicted this on her used his bare hands. She was described by the neighbors as being a little slow, and she was a former student at a Pinellas County Exceptional Student Center. She was frequently seen walking and hitchhiking in the area. Again, that hitchhiking things. So many victims are hitchhikers. She left behind a 2-year-old child she gave birth to when she's 17 years old. Now, her mother, later on, she says that a month before she's killed, she keeps getting these threatening phone calls every night at 3 a.m. And the mom is quoted as saying, this guy always identified himself as John from MacDill Air Force Base. He breathed heavy, and his voice made him sound strange, sort of crazy. The year before she was killed, she was raped by a man in a pickup truck while she was hitchhiking. So this girl had already encountered violence. And she was very lucky she escaped. But now, we're going to fast forward just what, 3 months? 3 months later, um, we come to our next victim. Her name is Joanne Parnell. And it's July 18th, 1977. Battered, partially clothed body of a woman is found in a shallow ditch along State Road 52. She's found by a two-man road crew from the State Department of Transportation. They come across her. She had just been killed. They estimated she'd been there like about 24 hours. She's only wearing a bra and a pink blouse that had been pulled up around her neck. However, there's no indication she'd been raped, according to the preliminary autopsy report. She They estimate she had died either from a blow on the head from a blunt instrument or by strangulation. But later on, when they do a more complete examination, they find that she had suffered a massive brain hemorrhage. 3 days later, they finally identify her as Joanne Parnell, age 40, and they match her up because of her fingerprints. The police department has a lot of difficulty finding her relatives. So they start going to all these tavern owners along US 41, which was Nebraska Avenue. This is in Hillsborough County. So the detectives, they retrace her steps because apparently she had a pattern. She had like her routine. And they went to what was her usual stops on a Saturday. First, there was the Mecca Lounge. And this is where she had once worked as a barmaid. And from there, she went to a place called the Liberty Lounge. This was a routine she'd followed from 8 to 10 years that she'd been living in the West Tampa area. She lived what they called a transient lifestyle in a Skid Row area. And what she did was she would just drift from room to room, apartment house to apartment house. And these were usually in buildings that had seen better days. She's described as a quiet person who didn't talk much about herself. She was well known to winos, the barmaids who lived and worked in the area, and she drank heavily, mostly draft beer and dark port wine. There was a rumor that she had a daughter who was in Jacksonville, and she possibly had some relatives in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Her only criminal record in Tampa was for child desertion. She had tried to sell or give away her son in a Tampa bar, which was pretty bad. But apart from that, she was just walking around from bar to bar where everybody knew her. Let me tell you something. It's even incredible when you think that she had survived for 8 to 10 years in this lifestyle. Now her friends, detectives are questioning all these people, and they're saying she had been living with a man named Sonny who lived in a room near the two bars. And they're like, okay. So, believe it or not, her case was one of the few that was solved. January 12th, 1979. And you're going to see what I mean about that, sometimes your luck runs out on you. This is about 18 months after she's found dead. There's a guy named Gene Arthur Wirtjes. He's 44 years old. He gets sentenced to 25 years in prison for her murder. He was already serving a 1-year sentence in the Hillsborough County Jail for stealing a truck in July 1977. So he killed her and stole a truck in that same month, probably right after he kills her. He goes to jail for the truck. They have no idea that they've got a murderer on their hands. And he kills her to prevent her from testifying in an aggravated battery case involving a stabbing that occurred at a local bar on July 5th. So apparently, she's witnesses a stabbing on July 5th. They find her 2 weeks later, 13 days later. She's dead. Now, and they never clarify, was he the one that was involved in it? Did somebody send him? I'm thinking to myself, and this lady had been walking around to all these bars for 8 or 10 years. Chances are, like I said, when those detectives were running around trying to get information, everybody knew how to keep, like, shut up, don't say anything. So he kills her. Her luck ran out. Now let's go forward. This is a month after they find Parnell dead. There's this 16-year-old Cheryl Stein Aurelia Cherry of Thonotosassa. She's found strangled, beat, and raped in a wooded area of Jackson Heights, and she's nude from the waist down. She was a school dropout, and she frequented local bars, but she had no known connection to strip clubs. And unlike most of the other victims, she was black, she wasn't white. Now, 5 days after that, another black woman, she's the 18-year-old Patricia Jones, she's alive. She's found alive, fully clothed at the foot of the Weeden Island Bridge in St. Petersburg. She had been shot 3 times with a 38 caliber gun, and she dies after telling police that a client had shot her. And she was a prostitute active on the Dale Mabry Strip. Now, this is where some of the theorists, once they realize we've got a pattern here going here, why it became that some believe that some of the murders were among competing pimps. Who knows? The next victim is uh, a girl. She's very young. Well, they're all so many of them are very young. Her name is Joan Gale Foster. She's 20 years old. They consider her the second of the strip victims found in Pasco. She's last seen hitchhiking from her home in Lutz to her job as a topless dancer at this place called the Godmother Lounge on Hillsborough Avenue. Her car broken down. She's found the next morning, September 28th, 1977. Okay, at this point, this is like within 3 months of Parnell's murder, uh, Aurelia Cherry and Patricia Jones. This is all happening within 3 months. She's just a fourth victim, even though it's, even if it might not have been the same perpetrator. So she's found the next morning, September 28th, 1977. She's fully clothed and she's lying in Orange Grove near Pasco Road, about a mile north of State Road 54 near I-75. She'd been shot twice in the left temple with a small caliber bullet, and she had come down from Memphis only 2 or 3 weeks before. This poor girl comes down to Florida chasing her own death. Her body was dumped only 3 miles from where Joanne Parnell had been found 2 months before. See what I mean? Like, what coincidental? Everybody's wanting to kill these women and dump them in the same place. Now, her body's returned to her family in Memphis for interment in a local cemetery. Now, the day following the discovery of Joan Foster's body, there's another girl named Molly K. Newell. She's 20 years old, and she's found with a gunshot wound to the head in Pinellas County. And the perpetrator, he's thrown the body off the Gandy Bridge. 12 days earlier, Molly Newell had pled guilty to offering to commit prostitution, was sentenced to 1 day in jail. In other words, again, it's a prostitution angle. By the way, for those of you that listen that are not familiar, Pasco, Pinellas, these counties are close together. They're in that same general area off the Florida's west coast. So the next lady, her name is Emily Greaves or Grives, and she's 38. Emily Ellen Grieve. She's 38. She's found within days of the last two murders. On October 21st, 1977, off a horseshoe-shaped road about a mile north of State Road 54, two hunters come across her corpse. She's got a gunshot wound to the back of her head in a field 500 yards from the location of where Wilma Wood's body was found in 1973. This was 4 years before. Now, that's what I mean. This is another example of when your luck runs out. This lady, Emily Grieve, 18 months before she gets killed, she's involved in a near fatal car accident. Leaves her with a limp, and she cannot use her hand, one of her hand, an inability to use her hand. and then she ends up getting killed. She escapes a very bad accident. 18 months later, she dies. Now, talk about, you know, there's 2 months later, after Emily Grieve is found, the same hunters that found her come across a skeletized remains of another murder victim. And a detective's later heard to say they don't hunt there anymore. Makes you wonder why, huh? Um, Grieve, Emily Grieve, she had relatives in Tampa. She'd been working as a clerk at the Interchange Motor Lodge near Fowler Avenue and I-75. Now, she tells her relatives that she was going to take the bus to work on October 10th, that the friends at the work at her job describe where she's riding with this nice young man and having coffee with him across the street from where she works. And she tells her fellow workers, tells them, oh, I'm going to meet him after work at the Owl Lounge just up the street from the Interchange Motor Lodge. So after waiting a while, she looks out the window for trying to catch sight of him and tells her friends, quote, keep an eye on me so nothing happens, end quote. I'm going down there. It's unknown if she ever made it to the Owl Lounge. She had worked at that same hotel as Gail Foster, who was killed a month before. So you see, like in other words, because Gail Foster, she's the one that had come down from Memphis, and and makes you think whoever's working, who the murderer, the killer, he's going in there and he's seeing them. Is it coincidence? You never know. Um, this poor lady, she's needs to meets a nice young man. Is gonna go down to see if she can see him because he hasn't shown up, and she never makes it to the Owl Lounge. Now the police, they even try to hypnotize a witness. And there was a woman who had driven along the lonely street of State Road 577 about the same time that Emily Grieve's body is being dumped. She recalled seeing a car near the site. Then later, as she's driving further down the road, the car passes her at a high rate of speed. And she was able to give them the type of car and a partial license number. Emily Grieve leaves behind a 13-year-old son. At that point, it's, again, another unsolved murder. Um, the the next one, the next person to die is a lady called, or girl again, she's only 18 years old. Her name is Judy Faye Beebe. She's found on November 25th, 1977. This is a month after Emily Grieve is found. It's Thanksgiving Day of 1977. And she's died of a stab wound so savage and so numerous that the medical examiner team termed her death a sadistic killing. And she's found near the Dade City dump. Originally, she was from North Carolina, and she lived with the migrant workers near Dade City. Uh, she had a daughter, Sonia. She was raised by the maternal grandparents after she was murdered. Again, think about it. She's 18. She has a 4-year-old daughter, which means she gave birth when she was 14 years old. So the daughter is raised by the maternal grandparents. And sadly, her own daughter died in 1997 at the age of 23. Now, a month later, after Judy Beebe's found, this is December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, 1977, the two hunters who had found Emily Grieve's body 2 months before discover the skeletonized remains of a 26-year-old man named Terry Crew. He's from Zephyr Hills. Eventually, this is when the detective goes on to say that, hey, they don't go there anymore. It seemed like every time they were going out hunting, just about every month or every other month, they're coming across dead people. So this guy, Terry Crew, he's from Zephyr Hills, 26 years old. November 1st, remember, he's found on December 22nd, so we're talking about 7 weeks before, November 1st, 1977, he goes to the Tampa dog track to collect his winning from a bet placed previously. But he had left his identification at his apartment in the Village Square Apartments near USF, and he was known to frequently place bets with a man named Pooch or Poochie, whom the police were never able to locate. This guy, Terry Crew's gray Ford van, is found abandoned in an orange grove near Lakeland on November 12th, 11 days after he collected the winnings. At that point, his body has yet to be found. And he's described as a, quote, wheeler dealer. And 2 weeks later, he's found by the hunters. The medical examiner finds he was shot in the back of the head while he was seated in the driver's seat of his van. One of the Grove managers connected the van with Crew when he heard the name of the dead man in a radio broadcast. The license on the van had been removed, but there were papers in it with Crew's name on them. So some smart guy in the orange grove where they find his body realizes, hey, that guy is the one with, the van. I'm sorry, the guy in the orange grove works in the orange grove where they find the van. About a month later, when they find his body, the guy puts two and two together and says, hey, that van belongs to that guy they just found dead. So they say that they think that he was shot in the back of the head because he was known as a karate expert. So he was, in other words, they executed him this way, which leads you to believe this had to be somebody that knew him well enough to know he was a karate expert. Because if this was somebody like a robber that just wanted to, maybe saw him get maybe some money and says, I'm going to rob this guy. He wouldn't know this guy knew karate. So obviously it was somebody that knew enough about him to know that, hey, I can't punch this guy, or I got to do it from behind. So January 15th, 1979, we're talking here like 2 years later, another Jane Doe, she's discovered. This was the 10th unsolved murder in Pasco County during the decade of the 1970s. When they find her, they nickname her the Tattooed Lady. And she's found about 200 yards south of Jerry Road near Crystal Springs by a squirrel hunter. I'm telling you, all these hunters have the best luck, huh? So they find she's been killed by multiple gunshot wounds, and she'd been dead about 1 to 2 weeks. And they believe that she was killed where they found it, which was like a secluded lover's lane near Hillsborough River in southeast Pasco County. She's fully clothed. She's got a red windbreaker with stripes on the shoulders and on the cuffs, black slacks, a black belt with a brass-colored buckle, and blue jogging shoes with pink socks. Now her body's been partially hidden under a fallen tree, and due to the decomposition of the body, they could not take fingerprints. But what they do find is she's heavily tattooed, especially on her upper body. She's got CE, Joe, and Cindy tattooed on her left arm, and on her left shoulder was a star or a cross and the initials EL. Her right arm had the initial R followed by Leo, and she had other tattoos which were unrecognizable letters. You never know, was it because she had already decomposed and they couldn't make them out, or they were like home tattoos? So they can't name her. They don't know who she is. And they bury her as a Jane Doe in Tucker Cemetery. 5 months go by. She's still unidentified. And police are thinking, okay, she's from out of state. Like, in other words, her family's not local in order to say she's missing, or that they would have placed a missing persons report. And the investigators believe she was a, quote, hippie type or a motorcycle gang member. But at the same time, they're thinking that whoever killed her was from the area because of the secluded nature of the lover's lane, which, according to them, only a local person familiar with the area would know how to find it. 1980. She's killed she's discovered, January of 1979. 1980. Two men are in custody in connection with the crime. And how this happens is his name, one of them is Robert M. Hardigree. He's 23. He's from Columbus, Georgia. He's charged with the first degree murder of this lady. And the other one is a guy named Eddie Ray Harvard. He's 25. He's also from Columbus. And he's charged with being an accessory after the fact. How they find out is, or how this comes about, is Harvard, he gets arrested in Alabama. And he tells the Alabama authorities, he tells them, I guess he's trying to, like, hey, I need to get out of this. I'm in a pinch. I don't know what they never specify he's arrested for, but I don't think it was murder in Alabama. So he tells them about the murder. So it sounds like he's trying to make a deal. So yeah, he in other words, he wants a lesser degree in return for agreeing to testify against Hardigree. In the end, he only gets sentenced to 5 years in prison, but Hardigree is found guilty and he's sentenced to life imprisonment on October 15th, 1980. So it turns out that they finally get her name, all right, her who she was. Her last name was Stewart, and she was with Hardigree and Harvard at a New Year's Eve party at a mobile home in northern Hillsborough County. And after a heavy drinking bout, she's driven to where her body was found. And this guy Hardigree shot her to death and then covered her body with leaves. And the other guy, Harvard, testified that Hardigree had grown tired of Stewart and was irritated because she wanted to return to Columbus. She had left two children in Columbus. So you think that's maybe she had come down with these guys and they were saying, "Oh, we're just gonna hang out there for a while," and maybe she wants to go back home, or maybe they're having her do something she doesn't want to, and she's maybe like, "Tell them, hey, I want to go back home. I want to go back home." Maybe this is the only way she's gonna get back home, and they kill her for it. She's got two kids back there. That, by the way, the kids were not with her; they were back in with her family in Georgia, and her name is Cindy Lou Carlton Stewart because, by the way, she was married. I don't know if she was divorced or not, but she had married. And her brother, Tim Carlton, he adopts the 4-year-old daughter, Tanya, and the paternal grandparents adopt her son, Alton, who was 2 years old. And for those of you watching the video, there's a picture of her with her son on her lap. What happens is she quit school in the ninth grade and starts running around with her twin sisters that were about 2 years older than her. She she was the eighth of 10 children. What happens is her sister wanted to marry, settle down, but she didn't. Now the investigators they make this breakthrough. Investigators here, as in Florida, in the local jurisdiction, make the breakthrough after they're contacted by the Opelika Police Department in Alabama with the information about the case. In other words, they're saying, we got a guy here saying he was involved in the murder of this person. And that's when they finally identify her as Cindy Lou Stewart, 19 years old, from Columbus, Georgia. At that point, I guess they realize, well, really, prior to this, because this is already, this is after the fact, but in October of 1977, these three counties had decided they needed to organize a task force to capture this killer. And they put 15 investigators on this task force. Um, and they interviewed prostitutes, strippers, barmaids. They're trying to figure out if there's one common denominator among the victims, besides the fact that maybe they frequented Dale Mabry Strip or whatever. They're like, now they did find that they did have certain things that were, if you want to look at it lightly, certain traits. First of all, they were single, or they worked or frequented the Dale Mabry Strip, which was lined with bars, adult bookstores, strip shows, X-rated movie houses. They were found within 8 miles of each other along State Road 54, which was the first exit off I-75 north of Tampa. They were last seen alive hitchhiking or walking. 5 of them were shot in the head with a .22 caliber weapon. 2 were strangled. 3 were found nude. and all the others partially nude. The prostitutes had their purses stolen, and the victims were killed elsewhere, and their bodies were dumped with little regard to hiding them. So the detectives, they start thinking, okay, these murders are related to other what they call strip murders in Hillsborough and Pinellas County. And by what they mean by these strip murders are in Pasco, it happened to be Dale Mabry, but all these counties had certain streets that were known as strips, or the same thing, adult bookstores, bars. So they're because all these counties are experiencing the murder of the same type of victims. Other victims were found under similar circumstances during the same period of the time where the other bodies were found in Pasco. And police believed that they were similar because they were committed by the same person. Two of the murders, the only two male victims, are related because the police believe they stem from the drug and gambling subculture of the Tampa Bay area. But their deaths were widely separated. So what only links them is their murder. The in other words, they themselves were not tied together. They just happened to have been in there somehow or other in the drug trade. Maybe low level, but nonetheless. What they did or who they, somebody got mad at them. Now, two of the older women murders were similar because of the lifestyle of the victims, but there the similarities end. Theories as to the identity of the murderer are: one, that it was a nut. Two, organized crime was behind it. Or three, the girls were knocked off by pimps. Some of them were linked to prostitution. Virtually every victim was involved in the marijuana trafficking. Then, suddenly, the strip murder stopped in late 1977, and no one's sure why. And when they mean strip murders, it doesn't mean the murders in themselves, because as you could tell, there were other murders after that. But as far as the victims being the ones that were frequenting the strip, that it stopped. Other murders continue, but but again, it's the same type of person, risky lifestyle. Uh, like this last one, Carlton Stewart. She's come down from Columbus, Georgia. She's drinking heavily New Year's Eve party. Obviously, who she's hanging out with, not the best people, even though apparently she knew them from back home. So, even though she's not on the strip, again, risky lifestyle is a denominator. And they don't know why it stopped in 1977. So, one of the theories is, and this is where we talk about the false confessions, or like guilty but not of everything. It's 1980, and there's a guy named Gerald Stano. He's arrested after one of his victims escapes. Now, once he's arrested, he's in custody. He confesses to killing at least 42 women. Now, later he recants on some of the confessions, saying he was forced to do so by one of the investigators. And now, among those he counted as victims were Diana Valek, Enid Branch, Joan Foster, and Emily Grieve. This guy, his birth name was Paul Zeninger. His biological mother neglected him so much that when she gives him up for adoption at the age of 6 months, the county doctors declare him unadoptable. It's pretty horrible when you read the full story on it. But eventually he gets adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Stanos, who were very loving parents. But even at an early age, he displays serious behavior problems. He had problems at school, and he graduates when he's 21 years old. By the time, when they lived out of state, but along when he's growing up, they come and they move to Daytona Beach in Florida. So he tells them, or he admits that he began killing in the early 1970s when he's in his 20s. But other times he claims that he started killing in the late 1960s at the age of 18. Several girls had gone missing in the area of his residence around that time, but there was insufficient physical evidence when these claims were investigated he was never charged. In other words, the police said, if it's true, there's not enough physical evidence. He was most active in Florida and New Jersey, and by his 29th birthday, he was in prison for murdering 41 women. He was executed in 1998 in Florida's electric chair, Old Sparky. He was electrocuted for the murder of Kathy Lee Scharf, who disappeared 11 days before Christmas 1973. Hunters, here we go, found her decomposed body in a drainage ditch at the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge near Titusville on January 19th, 1974. This is on the east coast of Florida. Some doctors theorized that Stano probably confessed to murders he didn't commit. In other words, he confesses to all of them. He's actually convicted of one. I guess they chose the one case that they had evidence on him, and that's why they say we don't know. Some of the earlier ones, we don't have enough physical evidence to investigate to determine even if he was the one. Again, maybe because of the victims that he chose, that they could say, hey, it could have been him, it could have been anybody, because these girls were hitchhiking, they were prostituting, or they were in a bad part of town. Yeah, but he might have done the murders. Some doctors think that also he might have confessed just at that point, just for the notoriety of it. Um, some theorized that Pasco County, especially the south central and southeastern portion of the county, served as a dumping ground for bodies. And the proximity to Hillsborough County and the fact several of the bodies were found close to arterial leading into the county are cited as factor. It was like maybe all you needed to do was cross county lines. Of course, always being close to a highway helps. And you'll hear that sometimes for certain other type of crimes, that locations which are, for lack of a better word, close to a getaway. You get on the highway, there's a bunch of cars. Also, back then, remember, a lot of these guys realized she lives in this county, but if I dump her across the county line, it's a different jurisdiction, different police department. They won't put two and two together. Now, there was a cold case that predated all of these. This is, and by the way, it still is a cold case. August 5th, 1965, there's a guy named Norris Clifton Hendrick, and he's found dead in the bathroom of his home at 41 Azalea Court, Oakdale Trailer Park in Zephyr Hills. He is a native of Fancy Gap, Virginia. He had arrived only a few weeks before, as he got hired to work at an area phosphate plant, and his wife Lucy's with him. Now, they think originally that this guy just died suddenly of a heart attack. Remember, this is not an old guy. Now, later, the death is listed as an unsolved murder per Sheriff Short due to certain classified information which was never disclosed. His murder remains unsolved. Remember, this Sheriff Short was elected in the 1970s. So I'm thinking he must have had his detectives, cold case detectives, go back on some of their unsolved murders. And they looked at this guy who supposedly died of a heart attack inside his home. And they never disclosed why it's changed from heart attack to murder. It just stays that way. I wish I could find out. I was very intrigued. Again, his remains a cold case. So you never really actually know what what happened to him. Um, and remember, these are just the victims that are found because of, if you want to call them lucky or unlucky hunters. And if you don't, and the reason why I say this, just like in the Everglades or any place that's woodsy or, very, not that people, maybe people will whiz by in a car, but you don't really have people walking around in there. Uh, I bet you there's bodies out there that have never been found. And by now, if there's anything to find. So what do you think? That they could put some, well, even the ones that he confessed to, that still left a lot of them as cold cases. And some of these women, in some cases, yes, they had missing persons report, but there's some of them that had lost touch with their family of origin, or they just didn't care. And nobody even would took the trouble of issuing a missing persons report. So at some point, maybe even if it was years later, some cold case detective starts putting two and two together and saying, "Wait a minute, this person sounds like that." And again, a lot of it has to do with how decomposed the body is when they find it. Was there any clothing? As a matter of fact, that one where it they described Stewart, that she had on a windbreaker that was like this, like she was fully clothed. When they contact her parents, her mom says, "Yes, I know, I gave her that windbreaker." Part of the confirmation of them verifying who she was because she was fully clothed and what she was wearing. Her parents were able to confirm, yes, we, as a matter of fact, we gave her that clothing. So in some cases, if there's clothing left, sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. And that just goes to show you that even though they're doing incredible things now with DNA, that CSI effect that everybody believes in, that cases get instantly um, discovered or resolved. It's not true. And by the way, question, Gerald Stano, he gets arrested in 1980. The murders, the strip murders, not all of them, the strip murders stop in 1977, 3 years before he's caught by the victim that got away. Does that mean it was somebody else besides him or the ones that he admitted to? Sounds like it, doesn't it? So anyway, guys, I hope you like this last episode of what happened to these cold cases. I will be back with you soon. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter at Substack. Also, go to mppellicer.com or miamighostchronicles.com if you want links to everything, whether it's a podcast, a video version of it, whatever the case might be. And thank you again for being part of my audience. Take care.